Senator from New Jersey.
Madam President, I rise in opposition to the nomination of Ms. Kelly Craft to serve as the next U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. As a firm believer in the strength and power of U.S. diplomacy, there are three main reasons I oppose Ambassador Craft's nomination. First and foremost, she lacks the experience necessary to stand up for American values and promote our national security on the global stage. Second, during her brief diplomatic tenure in Canada, she posted so many absences that I cannot describe it as anything less than a dereliction of duty. Ambassador Craft has also been unable or unwilling to convince the Senate that she will fully separate her professional obligations from her family's business interests. We cannot have an ambassador to the United Nations who risks using this incredibly influential position in ways that could benefit her own family's finances. This position is one of the most important diplomatic posts in our government. It's a global stage, and every leader who serves in this role must always put the country first. Since its founding, some of our most distinguished public servants have represented the United States at the UN. George H.W. Bush, Jean Kilpatrick, Thomas Pickering, Madeleine Albright, John Negroponte, Susan Rice, Samantha Power. These Americans brought to the table years of experience as former ambassadors, senior State Department officials, National Security Council staff, and more. Ambassador Craft simply cannot match the foreign policy and national security expertise offered by these distinguished leaders. Before serving as the U.S. ambassador to Canada, she had no previous significant foreign policy experience or executive experience at all. It would seem that her most relevant credential is that she, along with her husband, contributed more than $1 million to the president's campaign. During the confirmation process, Ambassador Craft's performance suggested a deep lack of knowledge and applicable experience. Now, I want to be clear. This is not a judgment on her character. This is merely an assessment of her ability to represent the United States of America on the world stage, where she will grapple with some of the most complex and challenging foreign policy issues of our time. When asked to identify at her hearing the most pressing issues facing the UN and comment on how the United States could leverage the UN to pursue our national foreign policy priorities, Craft displayed no sophisticated understanding of the many challenges confronting our country. She failed to mention North Korea's aggression or nuclear proliferation. She failed to mention ongoing threats from Iran. She failed to mention China's growing power and Russia's continued benign influence. When asked about the two-state solution, she could not articulate a viewpoint. When asked by Senator Paul whether she believed the Iraq war was a mistake, she replied that she was, quote, not going to second-guess the Bush administration. In response to Senator Cardin's question about the threat of climate change, she said that the United States does not need to be a member of the Paris Climate Agreement in order to show leadership. All the more disturbing are her past comments on climate change, like when she said, and I quote, I believe there are scientists on both sides that are accurate. Taken together, these answers should alarm anyone who hopes that the United States can use our power, our influence, and our leadership position to promote our interests and answer the great challenges of our time. Simply put, never in our nation's history has a president nominated such an underqualified person to this critical post for just being a donor. Ms. Craft also lacks the professionalism needed to be the UN ambassador. As our ambassador to Canada, she had one job: to represent the United States in Canada. Yet during her time in Ottawa, the defining characteristic of her service appears to be how little time she actually spent there. And the numbers speak for themselves. During the 608 days she served as U.S. ambassador in Ottawa, she spent 357 days outside of Canada. Let me repeat that. During her 21 months assigned to Ottawa, she spent an entire year out of Canada. For my colleagues who insist she was engaged in trade negotiations, the State Department's own records suggest otherwise. Indeed, the record shows she only spent 40 days on travel related to USMCA. She did, however, spend 210 days at her homes in Kentucky or Oklahoma. I repeat, she spent 7 of her 21 months as our ambassador in Canada at home in the United States. Now, last time I checked, not a single round of the USMCA negotiations took place in Kentucky or in Oklahoma. Additionally, while Ms. Craft claimed that she always received approval for her travel, records show that in at least 11 days out of the country, she did not have State Department approval. Should she be confirmed as ambassador to the UN, I think it's very fair to say that if an international crisis erupts, we might more likely find her in Kentucky than New York City. Ambassador Craft's absences represent a total abdication of her responsibility as the head of the U.S. Embassy in Canada, one of our nation's most vital allies. In one troubling instance, during the month when the Trump administration shut down the federal government, Ambassador Craft was in Ottawa for only 2 days. Rather than provide leadership to embassy personnel during uncertain times, she was at home in Kentucky. Perhaps she thought she was a non-essential personnel. Finally, Ms. Craft has also displayed a lack of diligence when it comes to preventing conflicts of interest. Look, I know this administration has sunk to some new lows when it comes to mixing family business with national security, but that doesn't mean it's okay. Norms are only as strong as our will to stand up and defend them. That's why we must push back against self-promotion at the expense of the American people. We also know that Ambassador Craft's husband, Joe Craft, runs the second largest coal producer in the eastern United States and has lobbied the EPA to roll back regulations against air and water pollution. Craft insisted to the committee that her husband, quote, plays no role whatsoever in official U.S. government business. But email and calendar records tell a different story. When Ambassador Craft needed information about U.S. environmental project, she asked her husband, not embassy employees, to connect her to former EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt. When the EPA sent the requested information to the ambassador, they included her spouse on the response. In addition to official calendars, Mr. Craft participated in at least 4 meetings with U.S. or Canadian government energy and environmental officials. The potential of conflict are staggering. The nomination of Ms. Craft to this position underscores the Trump administration's total lack of respect for the work of our diplomacy, our diplomats, and for the United Nations. Taken together, Ambassador Craft's lack of experience, her dereliction of duty and excessive absences in Ottawa, and her unwillingness to address potential conflicts of interest render her unfit to serve as our ambassador to the United Nations. In a world of growing challenges, the American people deserve a serious, thoughtful, proven leader to represent their interests at the United Nations. They deserve a leader who can leverage the United Nations to advance our national security interests and ultimately build a safer, more stable, prosperous world. And they deserve a leader who will put the interests of people over the profits of their family. Kelly Knight Craft is not that leader. For those reasons, I will vote no on this nomination and urge my colleagues to join me.
Cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a closed debate on the nomination of Kelly Craft of Kentucky to be the representative of the United States of America to the United Nations with the rank and status of Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary, and the representative of the United States of America in the Security Council of the United Nations, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the nomination of Kelly Craft of Kentucky to be the representative of the United States of America to the United Nations with the rank and status of Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary and representative of the United States of America and the Security Council of the United Nations shall be brought to a close. The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Ms. Baldwin.
Senators in the chamber wishing to vote or change their vote? If not, the yeas are 57, the nays are 33. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.